What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the new Google Pixel 4a to the Samsung Galaxy A71. So this is the comparison that you guys wanted to see most. These phones, as different as they may seem at first, are actually super similar when we get down to their specs, features, and the price. And I think this is a really tough choice if you're trying to decide which new phone to get. So we're gonna go over everything you need to know about these two phones. I'll of course do some side-by-side performance tests as well, so you can see them in action and see if there really is any difference. And hopefully by the end, you'll be able to decide if either phone is right for you. First things first, let's just quickly go over the prices since that is pretty important. With the Google Pixel 4a, you guys know this phone retails for $349 unlocked, and there's just one price, one configuration option, and one color with the 4a, so keep all that in mind. With the A71, it isn't quite as simple, but I'll try to sum it up the best I can. This phone has been out for a few months now, and while its original retail price was something like $400, you can get it from places like Amazon for a little cheaper now, maybe around $375 to $380. With the A71 though, you've got some color options to choose from and two configuration options, 6 GB of RAM or 8 GB of RAM, and that may have an impact on the price too. Either way you go though, you'll likely be paying $25 to $50 more for the A71 over the Pixel 4a. So that's the first thing you'll certainly want to take into consideration when deciding between these two phones. And if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, or maybe want to pick up one of these phones for yourself, I will have some links down below in the video description to where you can get these phones at their cheapest current prices. So be sure to check down there so you don't miss out on any good deals. Physically, obviously we are dealing with two very different devices, and I think this is where it's just going to come down to what you really want out of a phone. The Pixel 4a is a 5.8-inch device, and that's kind of small by 2020 standards. But the A71 at 6.7 inches is actually really big. You basically have the two extremes here, and side by side you can really see just how big of a difference there is between these two phones. The A71 not only is significantly taller, but also quite a bit wider as well. It's one of the biggest phones you can actually buy right now just in general. And in the hand, the A71 is a lot to manage. Even for someone like me with bigger hands who likes the bigger phones, it's a tough stretch reaching every side and every corner of the screen. With the 4a, it's much more comfortable, even just navigating with your thumb. And while over the last couple of years phones have continued to get bigger and bigger, the 4a certainly meets the needs for folks who are simply looking for something small. Like I said, size-wise, this is just simply going to come down to what you prefer. They each have their own pros and cons. As far as the housing and materials, both of these phones are plastic from top to bottom, but we do get different approaches here. The matte black housing on the Pixel 4a is this sort of smooth, soft touch texture. It's thick enough to still feel nice, but it is plastic, and Google didn't try and hide it or disguise it at all. With the A71, Samsung offers a shiny, colorful, glossy back that's made to look like glass, even though it too is plastic. And all around, you've also got shiny chrome accents that are made to look like metal, but again, are just plastic. With the builds here on both of these phones, you get no water resistance and no wireless charging on either devices, and that's just a product of them both being plastic. Again, there's no advantage here with one phone over another. Paying more doesn't get you any more with the A71, aside from just a shiny finish and some color options. Both of these phones are just plastic devices from start to finish. Taking a look around at everything else, on the left side, both phones do have a SIM tray, but only the A71 has the expandable storage as well. That's not offered on the Pixel 4a. On the right side, you have the volume and power buttons on both phones. Up top is where you'll find the headphone jack on the 4a, while the headphone jack on the A71 is down below. You'll also see the USB-C charging port on both phones and the speaker setups, but there is something important to mention here too. The Pixel 4a has the dual stereo speakers with the one down below and an additional speaker in the earpiece, while the A71 has just one single downward firing speaker. And in a side-by-side test, I think the Pixel 4a has the much better out loud listening experience. And here's a quick sample so you can get an idea of what that's like.
Yeah, we could be taking control if we try to believe in anything greater than a miracle. We could be taking control.
Around back, these phones of course have very different camera setups, which I will go more in depth with in just a bit. But besides that, you'll also see the fingerprint reader on the back of the Pixel 4a. This is a great setup. It's fast, it's accurate, it's placed well, and it's what we've seen on most other Pixel devices over the years. With the A71, it has its fingerprint reader underneath the front display, and while this setup maybe is a bit more fancy and modern, it's not necessarily something that's better, and it's not something I prefer just because it can be a little inconsistent at times and hard to find. Fortunately, the A71 also has a face unlock option, which is fast and accurate, and face unlock actually is something the Pixel 4a does not offer at all. So I just want to quickly go over what all is going on with these displays, and then we'll jump right into some speed and performance tests, since I know that's what you guys really wanted to see. The screen on the Pixel 4a is a 5.8-inch OLED display with a resolution of 2340 by 1080, cramming in about 443 pixels per inch. With the A71, its significantly larger 6.7-inch screen is Samsung's Super AMOLED Plus panel with a similar 2400 by 1080 resolution, packing in around 393 pixels per inch. Now, to be totally honest, while we are dealing with different displays, OLED versus Super AMOLED Plus, and slightly different pixel densities, I can hardly see a difference between these two phones. They're both bright, vibrant, sharp-looking panels that offer a fantastic viewing experience for the money, and I have no complaints. If you want to get super technical, yes, the Pixel 4a may appear to be a little sharper since you've got more pixels in a smaller form factor. And with the A71, the darker colors tend to look deeper, maybe a little better overall, but that's about as much as I can pick apart. No, there's no crazy high refresh rate, and the resolution isn't pushing any limits in general, but this is what you can expect for phones at this price point, and there's nothing wrong with either display at all. Okay, so let's talk about the specs and performance. I want to start out by just going over what all is inside each of these phones, and then we'll jump right into the tests. With the Pixel 4a, this phone packs the Snapdragon 730G processor paired with the Adreno 618 GPU, 6GB of RAM, and 128GB of UFS 2.1 storage with, like I said, no SD card expansion. With the A71, most everyone will probably get this device with the standard Snapdragon 730 processor. That's the one I have here, but there is also an international version with the 730G if it's available to you. This phone also has the Adreno 618 GPU as well, and a choice of either 6GB of RAM or 8GB of RAM with the same 128GB UFS 2.1 storage option. But like I mentioned, this phone also does have a micro SD card slot. Now, my A71 has the regular 730 processor, but it is the higher end 8GB of RAM model, so keep that in mind when we go ahead and run through these tests. And if you're curious, here are the AnTuTu scores for these phones. I know we're getting different numbers here, but in general, these two phones are just super close, within a few percentage points of one another. So the scores don't mean a whole lot since they are so close, but I at least wanted to just give you something to go off of. Now, right off the bat, the first big difference just in general is going to be with the user experience. Obviously, both of these phones are running Android 10, but the A71, of course, has Samsung's One UI 2 interface, while the Pixel ships with Google's own more optimized Android experience. And while you can make some adjustments, customize some things, and turn settings on and off for these phones, and all kinds of things you want to do, in general, I still feel like just out of the box, the 4a is simply the better optimized device. It may not always be the faster device in launching apps. These two phones, speed-wise, perform almost identically, it seems like. Sometimes the 4a will load something first, and sometimes the A71 beats it, but just navigating the UI and playing around with the phone in general, I think the user experience is snappier and more fluid on the Pixel. And I think that's just something you can expect. While Samsung has done a nice job with One UI 2 this year, Google's own Android experience is generally just going to be better. Like I said though, if you're just talking about speed and performance, I don't think with everyday app launches that either of these phones has a significant advantage. As we start to push things a little harder with gaming, this I think is where you'll start to see a little more of a difference, interestingly enough. The Pixel 4a appears to be just a bit faster than the A71 when we launch more graphics heavy stuff, and this is just with the launch and load times. I realize that's not much of an accomplishment, it may not even be a big deal to you, but it's something, so if you were looking for a difference, that's where you'll see it. Now, initial load times are one thing. Both of these phones can play whatever games you want really well, and that should come as no surprise. Back when the A71 was first launched some 6 or 8 months ago now, the Snapdragon 730 processor was at the time a decent mid-range chipset. Now that more than half the year has passed and Google brought along the 730G with their 4a, I think some people had hoped for something newer or better at this point, but I don't think it was necessarily a mistake. For the price, the performance is still great, and while the 4a is maybe 6 or 8 months newer than the A71 and may feel a little dated at this point if you're just looking at the specs as a new phone, I don't think it's all that much of a negative thing. From racing games to Call of Duty to Fortnite and beyond, you're not going to have any issues here with the 4a, and when we're talking about in-game performance in particular, both of these phones, in my opinion, are absolutely identical in how they play. I just don't see any advantage in one over the other, and I'm not really sure I expected any difference, to be totally honest. Now, there is one other important thing to consider with performance. Like I mentioned a minute ago, my A71 is the 8GB of RAM version, while the 4a has just 6GB of RAM. That may not seem like a huge difference, but that bump up in RAM might help the A71 in multitasking and just keeping apps current. You can see that as we start to go back to some previously loaded apps, the A71 was able to hold on to certain pages and keep things current longer than the 4a, which required some reloads. It's not a huge difference. It's not something that you see every single time with every single app. I still think 6 gigs of RAM is good on the 4a, and for most people on the A71, that's likely what you'll get anyway, but if you do want more RAM, if you want some extra assurance in multitasking and loading apps, you can pay a little more on the A71 to get 8 gigs, and that likely will make a difference in certain situations. All in all though, these phones performance-wise are really close, and I don't necessarily think one has a true advantage over the other. Really, the 4a might come out ahead if you're strictly looking at the UI and maybe the price, since you're saving a little money up front paying for the same specs, but that's about all I can come up with. If performance is your concern, either phone is going to be totally fine. Now, when it comes to battery life, there is a difference here. The Pixel 4a has a decent sized 3140 milliamp battery that can charge using the included 18-watt fast charger. The A71, on the other hand, has a larger 4500 milliamp battery paired with Samsung's superfast 25-watt charger. Now, yes, the A71 has a significantly larger display, which draws a lot of juice from the larger battery. But when it comes to just longevity in general, I do actually think the Pixel 4a has a slight advantage here. I'm seeing a little better battery life with the 4a during a day's use, maybe an extra 30 to 45 minutes of screen on time, sometimes a little more than that, though you can charge up faster on the A71 if you need to, so that might come into play. Neither phone has wireless charging like I mentioned earlier, but I think if you're looking for the longer lasting, more optimized phone for battery life, the 4a is the answer here. Finally, let's go over the camera setups because there's a lot going on. With the Pixel 4a, you get just the one single lens around back, a 12.2 megapixel f1.7 aperture lens, which to be honest is just sort of what we expect on Google's smartphones. There's never been a big focus on hardware, it's more so been on the software side of things with the actual shooting results. With the A71, on the other hand, Samsung put all of its efforts on the hardware. This phone has a quad lens setup, which includes a 64 megapixel f1.8 aperture main lens, a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, 5 megapixel macro lens, and 5 megapixel depth sensor. And by the way, it's a similar story up front too. The Pixel 4a has just an 8 megapixel selfie camera, while the A71 has a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Now, just strictly speaking on shooting modes and capabilities, the A71 has the advantage with wide angle, which can be useful, better, more capable slow-mo, 240 and 960 FPS. Obviously the higher megapixel shooting modes and some other stuff thrown in as well, though not everything is useful. The macro lens, for example, isn't a great addition, to be totally honest. But if you just want more shooting modes, the A71 has the edge here. If you want better results, better pictures specifically, the Pixel 4a is quite a bit better, and this should come as no surprise. The 4a is far and away the best picture taker for the money, and I'm still working on a more comprehensive dedicated camera comparison video between the 4a and some other phones in its price range. But if the quality of pictures is most important to you, the 4a will always be the better choice in that $300 to $400, even $500 price range. So here are my final thoughts. These two phones in a lot of ways are just super similar. Their performance is nearly identical. They offer a lot of the same specs and features, but their differences, from the size to the camera setups to their user experience, those all will yield a different opinion from different people. I think the Pixel 4a has the advantage when it comes to those stereo speakers, for example. It has maybe a little bit of an advantage in performance being so well optimized by Google, and obviously has the better shooting capabilities as well. But the A71 is a big, huge phone with a ton of screen real estate, which I know a lot of people like. It looks nicer with a shiny, fancy looking housing, and there's a lot of potential with its cameras too, just in a different way. What I think it comes down to really for me is actually just the price. For $350, the 4a, in my opinion, simply offers more bang for your buck. But what do you guys think? Which phone do you prefer? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.